On the night that he died, or the morning that he died,
Mm-hmm.
Had you talked to him at all that day?
Before he left that day, he was at Bronson Exxon getting cigarettes for my dad, and he called me and told me his car wouldn't crank. So I checked his car, I went to go jump it off, and it's like somebody loosened his battery connections. So I tightened them back up and I followed him all the way home. He hopped in the shower, got out, and left at exactly 6 o'clock. And that was the last time.
Did he say where he was going to?
No.
You said he started acting real funny about 2 weeks prior to his death?
He was acting a little secretive.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. Recent breaking news is that SLED are treating Stephen Smith's death 8 years ago, so 8 years later, as a homicide investigation. Sandy is apparently elated at this news. Based on my poll, I put it up yesterday, almost 3,000 of you have voted. Please go and vote if you haven't already. But according to the poll, almost 80% of you believe Stephen was murdered as well. It always seems to be so easy to lose perspective in true crime cases. One way to regain perspective is to remember to ask simple questions. And then we must make an effort to answer them. The answers are out there. We simply need to be curious. We need to put on our scout mindset hats and start knocking on doors.
Worth playing for?
Yeah.
The obvious question to ask in the Stephen Smith case is this. Where was Stephen going on the night that he was killed? The second is, why did he fail to reach his destination? The second is definitely a more complicated question with a much more complicated answer. So let's start with the first question. And I've got to say, when we ask these questions, although we want to keep them simple, we don't want to be reductionist or too simplistic about it. So when we ask the first question, where was Stephen going on the night that he was killed? We aren't referring to the confusing muddle just before he died. We're trying to ascertain Stephen's intentions. If we could speak to Stephen, what would he say? At the beginning of the day, the middle of the day, when he got into his car to, begin his final journey, where did he intend to go? Where was he planning to be? So before anything happened, what was the plan? Where did he and others, such as his sister, his father, where did they expect him to be bedding down for the night? Where did he plan to sleep that night? In short, what was his destination in his mind, and how far from it did he die? Or how far from it did a situation arise that he didn't expect? So these are the questions we're going to ask, and then at the end of that, I'll leave it to you to ask yourself, whatever the question and whatever the answer, does this take us closer to figuring out a homicide situation or some other situation? And so before we deal with this analysis, do you know the answer? Where was Stephen going on the night he was killed? Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. Thank you to the thousands of you who have subscribed. Thank you also to the dozens of you who responded to my appeal to join the Team Peachtree channel. It has now reached that goal milestone. Thanks so much for that. Those of you who are enjoying the analysis here, who want to connect more deeply with the True Crime Rocket Science community and also with me, you can join Patreon. That's patreon.com/TCRS. I put up multiple posts a day, also analysis there, and I try to respond to comments as well. In terms of this episode, if you're enjoying the analysis, if you're finding it is unbiased, fact-based, good quality research, you can please hit the thanks button. You can like, share, leave a comment, and let's get started. So it turns out Stephen's destination isn't so difficult to find if you're prepared to make the effort to look. And in episode 2 of the HBO series Low Country, the Murdaugh Dynasty, the answer is provided, albeit briefly. Stephen was headed home. Home was his father's house. and his father's name was Joe, and his father's house was on Joe Miley Road. It's sort of a blink and you'll miss it moment. Without looking at a map, one can intuitively tell that the distance from the vehicle to Stephen's body is similar to the distance from his body to his ultimate destination, his father's home on Joe Miley Road. So 3 miles from the abandoned car to the incident scene, right? And because it's almost a straight shot down to Joe Miley Road, it's less than 3 miles from where Stephen was laying in the road to home. In fact, it's about 2.3 miles to be exact. From my own research, there seems to be a rush to try to figure out why Stephen wasn't focused on gas. Why wasn't he getting gas? And as a result, is this the gas cap on his vehicle, the way that it was left, was that staging, right? It's also been repeated that it makes no sense that Stephen was walking in the opposite direction to the nearest gas station. And so HBO provides kind of, in my opinion, a bit of a misleading graphic. That gas station is in Hampton, and it's a 5-mile walk either from the point where his vehicle was or from the incident scene. So, and 5 miles is quite a hike at 1, 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. And bear in mind, it's not only a 5-mile hike to the gas station, but probably a 5-mile hike back as well. That's 10 miles. It's a long way to go. And I say it's misleading because my research seems to indicate a gas station right there in Crocketville, just over a mile from the abandoned yellow Chevy. There's a single gas pump associated with the Crocketville Country Store. It does have a gas pump, but strictly speaking, I don't think you can say it's true that he was walking away from the nearest gas station. In order to get to Sandy Run Road, Stephen would have to walk through Crocketville, and there's a gas station there. But we must remember that if Stephen walked this way at 1, 2, 3, or 4 o'clock in the morning, he likely found the store closed. And that, I think, is a big aspect a lot of people are forgetting about. The time of day that this occurs. Everyone else is asleep except Stephen. And I did check the operating hours of the store. It opens at 7 a.m., closes at 8 p.m. on a Wednesday. And so the question arises, could he pump gas if the store was closed? And this then raises another question. Was his number one priority getting gas at 2 or 3 or 4 in the morning? That seems to be what a lot of people are assuming, and then saying, well, because he wasn't walking in that direction, it's staging. But the other thing to ask is, did he really want to fix the car? Or did he want to get a little sleep first? Or did he have a different strategy to fixing the car to the one that we expect? And so that then brings us to a really interesting aspect, this idea that past behavior is the best predictor of future behavior. And that is the case with so much, with people that we know, people that we don't know, with economics, with politics. Past behavior is the best predictor of future behavior. And that's equally true of human beings as it is of engines and machines. And based on what Stephen's sister Stephanie said, Stephen actually had car trouble that same day. And Stephanie came out to help him. She said this was at 6 o'clock on Tuesday morning. And what had happened is he'd driven to a gas station, Exxon in Brunson, which is the gas station closest to his father's house. And he went there to buy smokes for Joe. And then that is when he had car trouble that morning. And obviously the car trouble in that instance wasn't that he had run out of fuel. Stephanie came out to help Stephen on that occasion. She said that she fixed the problem herself by lifting the hood and tightening the wiring around the batteries. This happened on July 7th, Tuesday, Stephen's last mortal day on earth. It's very, very close to the timeline of the incident. Do you agree with that? Is it relevant? The fact that he had an electrical problem the day before, requiring someone to come out and help him, and he was at a gas station, I think lowers the odds that he needed gas to begin with. We know then for a fact that he was at a gas station the morning before? Didn't he put in gas? So I think it's a mistake to assume that the only possible explanation is that he ran out of gas. I think that's a mistake. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. Maybe it is made to look that way. If he didn't run out of gas, does that mean he didn't have engine trouble? If he didn't run out of gas and he did have engine trouble, what caused it? Now, maybe when the car stopped working, he wasn't sure why, and opening up the gas tank was one way that a naive teenager tried to figure out what was wrong. Perhaps he thought the fuel gauge was faulty. And I know when I was a teenager, you sometimes go somewhere, you leave your headlights on, you run the battery down. You've got to take out the battery to charge it or replace it. And this then leads to, maybe if you do it yourself, this then leads to the wiring being loose. Couldn't this have happened? Isn't that something that may have happened to you? And that then brings us to the next point, secretive. It may also be that Stephen chose not to call out his sister again, twice in 24 hours because of male ego, because he'd called her out the day before. Also, she says that Stephen was secretive in the 2 weeks before his death. We know that from his own sister. And so maybe he didn't want to explain why he was where he was late on a Tuesday night. So the number 5 clue we all missed is that 4220 Joe Miley Road, that was Stephen's destination that night. That was where his father Joe was living, and that was where he was staying. So either way you cut it, what I think is very heartbreaking about this case is that where Stephen died was just 2 miles away by road from his home, just a 3-minute drive by car. He was very close to home, where his body was found. So if Stephen was walking to get home, he was literally less than a quarter mile, perhaps an eighth of a mile from the turnoff onto Joe Miley Road, this final stretch to a bed, to friendly faces, to safety. Perhaps an eighth of a mile from exiting Sandy Run Road onto what appears to me to be a quieter country road. And so if he had just gotten onto that road, wouldn't he still be alive today? After making a total journey of over 80 miles north-south from Orangeburg, that is where he was attending the Orangeburg Calhoun Technical College, where he was studying nursing, right? From there, through Bamberg and Earhart, something happened just 1 mile from Crocketville and about 5 miles from home. It really completed something like 96% of his journey, and he was almost home. And maybe he just thought, dang it, I'll just walk the rest of the way. Right? Do you see that the 19-year-old may have figured it made more sense to go home, where he could at least make sure he got a ride, than go the same distance to a gas station in Hampton, but then have to walk all the way back from there and carrying a gas can. That's quite a long way, 5 miles to carry a full gas can. So if this is what happened, then he was at an incredibly short distance shy, as I say, of exiting the road that was to claim his life. And sometimes it's on these things that life and death sometimes turn, on these hinges, on these slim odds, if that's the word. Whatever happened to Stephen, he died just 2.3 miles from Stephanie, from Joe, from safety, from his bed, from getting to live out the rest of his life. And so that is the number 5 clue we all missed. A simple question with a very simple answer, but then the question is, what relevance does that answer have? Does that take our knowledge base? Does that change the context of what we know and what we think? Does that change anything in your mind? So a final observation, I noticed for the first time while researching this episode that there are white lines on the road where Stephen died. And this suggests there was a place, or seemed to be a place, or he may have felt that I have every right to walk on this little piece of road. This is my place on the road, and your place on the road is over there. This is where I can walk as a pedestrian. And does that have an impact on the possible events? So this was episode 5 and the 5th clue that we all missed, and there'll be one more, the final episode in this series. In that final analysis, we'll look at additional incident scene images and try to make sense from his body position, just that alone, what really happened here, what may have happened here. The critical question is, why are his knees bent and to one side, whereas his upper body is flat on the ground? Why is that? What do you think? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.